Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. Waste not, want not. This old saying rings so true today as global leaders and local communities alike increasingly call for a fix for the so-called throwaway culture. But beyond individuals and households, waste also represents a broader challenge that affects human health and livelihoods, the environment, and prosperity. Poorly managed waste is contaminating the world's oceans, clogging drains and causing flooding. Greenhouse gases from waste are also a key contributor to climate change. But there's a growing number of ecopreneurs who aim to send nothing to a landfill that also tackle poverty. We'll look at this and more on today's episode of Earthfile. Do stay with us. Inside Nigeria's Waste Museum in Ibadan City in Oyo State, Jumoke Olowokere works on her latest creations made out of used tires to add an addition to a wide collection produced from used plastic and fabric, wine corks and corn husk, among other material. Jumoke, who says her museum is the first of its kind in Africa, joins a growing number of Nigerians who are using waste material to make art and fashion to highlight the damaging impact of waste on the environment.
We are all parts of a big picture. The way God has created the universe is that you need me, I need you. And then we need the universe. We have three basic elements in the universe, and that is plants, animals, and humans. Humans are the higher system. We are the higher being. But we are interdependent. Me as the humans, I need the plants. The plant needs me. I need the plants more than the plant even needs me. I also need the animals. And so, these three basic elements must learn how to live together in harmony, the way God has created it, without one disturbing the other or one extincting the other. And that is basically what we want to showcase at the Waste Museum. So it is not only about waste, it is actually a showcase for circular economy. Now, these three basic elements can live together in harmony without generating waste, because the waste of one can be used by the other. And the humans are the ones that will even benefit the most if we learn to live in harmony with nature. So basically, that is what we do. And as an entrepreneur, but a social entrepreneur, and an ecopreneur for that matter, we are more particular and more focused on the environment. How our everyday decision is affecting somebody else.
With more than 200 million people in Nigeria, plastic waste in particular, in the form of discarded bags, food and drink packaging, is ubiquitous and dropping of litter is commonplace. Nigeria generates roughly 2.75 million tons of discarded plastics per year, and inefficient waste management infrastructure means 70% of it ends up in landfills, sewers, beaches and other waterways. Waste from Lagos, for example, flows into the Gulf of Guinea, leaches dangerous chemicals into the water supply, and causes numerous public health risks.
Most businesses are just about, I want to solve a problem and I want to make money from it. But as a social entrepreneur, it is beyond that. It is not only that you want to make money, but the money you are making, is it harming the environment? Is it harming my neighbor? Am I making money and making profit at the detriment of somebody else? If I start a company now and I start a factory and I'm releasing toxic air into the atmosphere, and then people around me are having cancers, having ailments that you cannot trace, and I'm claiming that I'm making profit, is that really making profit? No. The profit is going into my pocket, but the environment is suffering for it. So as a social entrepreneur, we are more concerned about the problems we can identify in our community and how we can solve it.
Jumoke says she had the idea when she saw the amount of waste generated in her kitchen, such as plastic and corn husks. She started piling them up in a corner of a room while reading up on how to reduce and recycle. The visual arts teacher spoke as United Nations member states were meeting in Nairobi to agree plans for the first global treaty to tackle plastics pollution. Jumoke says she collects some of her waste material from people's homes and also makes equipment for school playgrounds. Work from other artists is also featured at her museum, which includes Ottoman furniture and ceiling panels made from worn-out car tires, as well as curtains and jewelry produced from bottle tops.
Our mission is to create a sustainable world without waste, and our solution is simple. We call it our 5 R's and a U: reduce, reuse, recycle, refuse, repair, and upcycle. We believe that if everybody can do this, then we can achieve our mission, which is to create a sustainable world without waste. So we had this razor that we were using before, and it was spoiled. And then somebody else called me and said, I have one razor that I wasn't using. Do you want it? I said, I want it. So I went to go and pick it up. On getting here, my freezer that was spoiled, what was spoiled in it, what the other person gave me, I could find what was spoiled in it in the other. So we exchanged, we just took what was spoiled in the other one and we put it in. So we had spare freezer that was useless and we couldn't do anything with it. So it was in the space, I was using it as a table. Several months later, I was like, oh, let's have a fish pond. And then we were looking for a tank. And I had a small space. And they said, oh, a big tank that is made from plastic, this is how much. I said, no, we don't have that kind of money. And then it will not even take this space. So I was looking for a perfect square. And then I remembered, oh, this freezer has a big space. And then I was like, oh, how will it be removing the water? Then I saw that there was a drain in front of that. I was like, oh my days. And we took it outside, poured the water in, bought the fishes. And the reason why we picked fish, rabbits, and chicken is because their waste are super, super magic for the plants. The waste from the chicken is good manure. The waste from the rabbit, both the wee and the poo is good manure and good pesticide. And guess what? The wastewater from the fish, oh, sugar. Beautiful, beautiful water to wet your plants. They make your plant do well. So they are part of our system. Then for the humans, you see the human definitely there, you see the artworks, all done from waste. So when you come in here, the focus and the mission for the Waste Museum is for people to come in here and be inspired to go and use their own skills that they have before, add it to the waste problem, and bring up another solution in their own space for the good and the benefits of mankind.
The museum's debut arrives as the conversation around plastic waste has been intensifying. In 2022, world leaders from 175 countries agreed to develop a legally binding United Nations treaty to regulate plastic production and design on a global scale for the first time. Passed as the United Nations Environment Assembly using a recycled plastic gavel, the treaty also establishes universal targets to curb plastic waste, much like the Paris Agreement does for carbon emissions. Global plastic production is projected to double within 20 years, while the amount of plastic waste flowing into the world's oceans is forecast to triple in the same period. Studies have shown that plastics output must be curbed to rein in skyrocketing plastic pollution, which is clogging waterways, despoiling oceans and killing wildlife. But such measures had been expected to face resistance from countries like Japan, that are major producers of the petrochemicals in plastic.
And there are many international conventions like Basel Conventions and other conventions. And also there are many voluntary initiatives to address plastic pollution. But, the increasing pollution suggests that they are clearly not sufficient to address the issue so far. Legally binding solution is now necessary to bring all countries on board and raise awareness of all stakeholders, including general public, and strengthen measures. So I think that's why we need a legally binding solution, and we would dive into the negotiations.
The first round of treaty negotiations took place in Uruguay at the end of 2022, with the agreement described by the United Nations as the most significant Green Deal since the Paris Climate Agreement. It is expected to be finalized by 2024. Japan's lead negotiator says the proposed United Nations Plastic Waste Treaty must consider putting restrictions on the most problematic plastics, marking the first time the country has suggested it will support curbs on plastic production.
We need to look at the production side of the plastics. If those are unnecessary or there are any other, environmental friendly alternatives. So we need to look into those specific issues, and we very much welcome and appreciate the views and information from industry side and business side on whether they can, produce or make use of any alternatives to those unnecessary type of plastic materials or not.
Mr. Ono added that microplastics and plastics that are hard to recycle were among the materials that should be dealt with by the treaty. However, the American Chemistry Council, a trade association for some of the world's biggest plastic producers, warned that any move to restrict plastic production could backfire.
As we look to the global agreement and as we look to some of the calls that we've heard to restrict production, I think we need to keep in mind the tremendous value that plastics provides to society, whether it's providing clean drinking water, whether it's supporting the generation of renewable energy, lightweighting vehicles to make them more energy efficient, or making sure that food is able to get to the consumer and we reduce food loss. There would be tremendous unintended consequences if we were to restrict production. We need to really use the opportunity of this global agreement to rethink how the system is established. We're looking across the life cycle of plastics, and really a foundation of access to collection is critical if we're going to move to a more circular economy for plastics.
Plastic output is projected to double within 20 years. While the amount of plastic waste flowing into the world's oceans is forecast to triple in that period, the scaling up global recycling is critical to tackling plastic waste. But these efforts will not prevent plastic pollution from continuing to balloon without constraints on production, a landmark 2020 study by Pew Charitable Trust found.
We need better systems. We need to look at product redesign. We need to look at delivery mechanisms for consumers across the life cycle of plastics and across the various uses. But when we start to talk about restricting production, it becomes very complicated because, again, that production doesn't go into a specific application per se. It has the opportunity to go into many different applications. And so restricting production of polyethylene or polypropylene or other different resins will have tremendous negative impacts on the economy.
Swiss food and drink giant Nestle is among several big brands that have called for a reduction in virgin plastic production to bolster markets for recycled material and catalyze a shift towards reusable packaging. That call comes as big consumer goods makers, including Nestle, look set to miss a target to make plastic packaging more sustainable by 2025.
3 points. So we know we need to turn off the tap and reduce plastic production so that we can have a circular economy approach for the plastic that's in circulation today, which is a tremendous amount of plastic. We want to keep plastics in the economy and out of nature. I think everyone agrees on that. And we recognize that both reuse and recycling can play roles here because reuse can increase with the number of cycles a reusable package is circulated, dramatically reduce the amount of recycling that needs to be built. And thirdly, prevent and remediate hard to prevent microplastics and macroplastics from leaking into the environment. And we recognize that there are some contexts in which more leakage is taking place, and we need specific strategies to address those. But national regulations today are unable to address this transboundary issue. We need a multilateral approach because plastic waste knows no borders.
On its part, the European Commission proposed in November new rules to reduce packaging waste through increased recycled content in plastic drinks bottles and target for reuse of takeaway cups and materials used for online deliveries. On the proposal, all 27 EU members will be required to reduce packaging waste per capita by 5% by 2030 and 15% by 2040, compared with 2018 levels. Packaging now accounts for 36% of municipal solid waste. The Commission said packaging waste, notably plastic, would continue to rise if no action were taken, increasing emissions of greenhouse gases and so jeopardizing the EU's target of net zero emissions by 2050. It is believed that the traditional roast Christmas dinner, enjoyed by millions on the 25th of December, could have nearly 250,000 pieces of microplastic in it. That's according to researchers in the south of England. The researchers cooked 2 identical roast chicken dinners, very similar to a Christmas dinner, one with all the ingredients wrapped in plastic packaging and the other with no plastic packaging.
So today we're cooking a fresh dinner with fresh produce and not wrapped in plastic, and then we will be cooking one that is wrapped in plastic to see if there is a difference in the number of microplastics on your plate between the two.
The study revealed the meal made from ingredients wrapped in plastic contained almost 7 times more microplastics by weight than the non-plastic wrapped one. Cooking the food in its packaging is also thought to increase the amount of microplastic that ends up in the plate. But food wrapped in plastic that isn't cooked in its packaging also contained substantially more. Eating a similar plastic packaged meal every day for a year would see you consume approximately 10 grams of plastic, equivalent of 2 plastic bags a year.
So we looked at a plastic wrapped dinner and a non-plastic wrapped dinner, and we cooked them to see how many microplastics were in them. And we found 7 times more microplastics in the wrapped dinner than the non-wrapped dinner.
The researchers say food is usually analyzed raw for microplastics under laboratory conditions, but this study looked at what was actually on your plate after the food had been cooked in a normal kitchen.
So we found about 55,000 particles in the non-wrapped dinner and about 230,000 in the wrapped dinner. Yes, unfortunately, there's no such thing as a microplastic-free food now, I think. That's because there's so many microplastics in the air and in the soil. So as we're speaking now, there are likely to be some microplastics that are falling on here, onto the food that we'll be eating. But also if you look at the agriculture, the plasticulture, which is the amount of plastic that goes into our farmlands, there are huge concentrations of microplastics in our soils. In fact, more than there is in the ocean. I have heard people say, I don't have to worry about microplastics, I don't eat fish. And that always worries me slightly, that there's that misunderstanding, that disconnect. Microplastics are everywhere. If you're eating anything and in drinking anything, you will be ingesting a certain number of microplastics.
Researchers have already found microplastic in the blood, the gut, and various human organs, but we are not yet able to say what, if any, harm it is doing to us.
None of us want to have large quantities of plastic eating in the food, but whether that is causing any health harm, it's too early to say. All we have established now that it is there in the body, and it is there in the body, staying in the body in significant quantities. What we don't know is that what is it doing there? That's the research.
The European Commission proposal, which could still be changed, retains recycling targets of 65% by 2025 and 70% by 2030 from the directive's last update in 2018. With specific targets per packaging material, all packaging we need by 2030 to be designed so that it can be recycled, and manufacturers should ensure it is in reality recycled at scale by 2035. The proposal, which will need approval by the European Parliament and EU governments to become law, lays down specific rules for plastics for which an EU official said recycling was not at the same level as paper, metals and glass. The planned legislation proposes minimum target for recycled content in plastic packaging, such as 30% for drinks bottles by 2030 and 65% by 2040.
A few years ago, the Commission set out to make plastics fully circular, limiting and even banning some of the most polluting single-use plastics. I'm sure you'll remember and you know the examples: straws, cutlery, cups, plates, food containers, etc. Today, we're taking the next step by putting the entire packaging sector firmly on track towards circularity. The way goods are packaged can and should be done a lot better. I think everyone has experienced it. You order something online and it comes in a massive box that's half empty or contains double layers to make the product look larger than it is. Or you go to a cafe and instead of being served on regular plates, you get food in single-use containers, so you leave behind a mountain of waste. Such overpackaging is a nuisance to us and increasingly damaging to our environment.
Certain plastic packaging, such as tea bags, coffee pods, very light plastic bags and sticky labels for fruits and vegetables will need to be compostable. The Commission is also proposing the phase-out of single-use plastic items, such as the bags and nets used for food in shops and cafes, and the mini shampoo bottles found in hotels. EU members will also be required to have deposit return systems in place for plastic bottles and cans. The proposal also lays out minimum target for reuse of packaging, such as 20% of takeaway cups by 2030 and 80% by 2040, and respectively 10% and 50% for packaging used to deliver online purchases.
So our proposal aims to do three things. First, we reduce packaging where it makes sense. Think about limits on overpackaging in online retail and no packaging for smaller quantities of fresh fruits and vegetables. Second, we want more packaging to be reusable because we cannot recycle ourselves out of a growing stream of waste. And reusable packaging in a well-functioning reuse system is better for the environment than single-use options. Going forward, businesses will have to offer some products in reusable and refillable packaging. For example, by 2040, most coffees to go will come in a reusable cup or a cup we bring ourselves. And third, all packaging should be easy to recycle and made as much as possible from recycled material.
Global leaders, local and international government, non-governmental organizations, public and private players, and all relevant stakeholders are urged to implement policies and structures that enable eco-entrepreneurs to overcome barriers, reskill and replicate. Despite the great opportunities offered by eco-entrepreneurship, social and environmental enterprises in Africa face major financial and technological challenges. Green enterprises struggle to secure loans. They tend to be perceived as more risky than conventional businesses.
Presently, we are only able to save, let's say, 1 ton of plastics a month. I see our company being able to at least save maybe 100 tons of plastic because we want to go into recycling. We want to go into a bigger way of using this waste for resources, for materials that we use every day. Presently now we are using plastics to do furnitures, but it is not recycling, it's upcycling. We're not breaking down the plastics. We're just using the plastic. Okay, look at my jewelries. These are bottle covers. We're not breaking down the bottle covers. We're not crushing it, we're not melting it. And we're just adding materials to it. By that 2025, that is 2027, to have trained at least 2 million people on upcycling. Then in aspect of company, by that 5 years' time, we want to get to that level whereby we'll be at least tackling 100 tons of plastics, breaking them down, turning them into new products that is readily usable in the market.
Experts say putting a dent in poverty while conserving the planet's natural resources is no easy task. They say without disruptive, innovative enterprises and support from global leaders and relevant stakeholders, African countries risk remaining shackled by extreme poverty and the impact of climate change. In an era of rapid urbanization and population growth, solid waste management is critical for sustainable, healthy, and inclusive cities and communities. If no action is taken, the world will be on a dangerous path to more waste and overwhelming pollution. Lives, livelihoods, and the environment will pay an even higher price than they are today. I'm Ayola Kasim, asking you to join us next week for another episode of the program. Do not forget, our inbox, earthfile@channelstv.com, is available for your comments and your questions. From all of us here in